Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Nancy realized she had to leave her husband Herbert. It all started with a banal slap to throw a fish board behind the cabinet. And within minutes, Nancy was yelling, "I told you to go to the kitchen and clean up. Where's the board?" She knew I was back from fishing. The man would start up out of the blue. At first, Nancy tried to play it off, like you just put it there yourself. But Herbert denied it and kept yelling, eyes bulging. "Get ideas. Do you know where it is?" howled the man with eyes red with rage. But Nancy doesn't fall for this trap anymore, for it's as if he was afraid to hit her when he looks into her eyes. Last time he got to the point that she spent too much soda, which he was doing the dishes and defiantly threw the packet on the floor with the words, "This is what you've driven me to. Let's not save any money at all." And when she got scared, I don't know what happened. Even though she had nothing to do with it, she got hit on the back pretty hard. In a board-and-board situation, Nancy met the challenge face to face, grabbed the kettle that had just boiled, opened the lid and yelled, decided to play kitchen fighter. Take that. The woman pretended to throw boiling water on him, but he ran away with the bath that had recently appeared in their apartment. Nancy realized that she could not stop her husband's growing insolence for long. It would end in the death or serious injury of one of them. And already last night, when he shoved her sharply with words under the covers, "Knock down, get up and write. How can you sleep? Asshole," and then went smoking drunk on the balcony. She suddenly began to think about the fact that the railing of the balcony is quite low, and it is only necessary to push just a little bit. Nancy did not expect from herself that there was so much primal rage in her, but she overcame herself and just closed it on the balcony. And what's not to freeze hard in the spring? And the windows have ordinary glass. Wants to get out? He'll just wrap a t-shirt around his arm and smash one of them. Of course, he'll be mad that he has to pay for the glass, but he'll remember that he has to pay for the consequences of his attacks. Besides, the woman didn't want to go to jail for killing some wretched, immoral freak that Herbert had suddenly turned into over the past year. And she certainly didn't want to let him victimize her. Mom, and it had started out so romantically. Nancy told her mom, who'd gone off in a cab, taking only her bank card, laptop, and passport, which had long been lying around in case Herbert escalated. Nancy beats means she loves. Samochko is just jealous. Or maybe she's going through a rough patch because she really is a spender. And not always so titty around the house. No wonder it makes him angry. And what happens if you leave him? I can't support you. And I'm renting out a room in my apartment, you know that. I have to live on something. It's hard to find a job at my age. Where will you go when you're poor? Then she'll point at her mother and say it's all my fault. What's it like with you young people nowadays? Nancy's mother even wept, especially when it came to the fact that she would not be able to let her daughter live in her apartment. It was obvious that she was far more concerned about this issue than where Nancy was going to go. But the young woman, like many in her position, didn't want to see the obvious. Her mother was not going to help her and was just looking for reasons to explain the motives behind her actions. So she continued to convince her mother that you are wrong. After all, as a young Nancy does not distinguish between conversations in which decisions not to help have already been made and continue to debate. So Nancy continued to broach the subject of, "Are you serious? So you think it's okay for me to risk my life or my freedom every day, just for the sake of? To do what? So he doesn't have to pay rent or burden you. What's to expect if Herbert gives birth to a son he'll raise to be a monster? Or a daughter who'll get used to being a victim and spend her whole life collecting misfortune, and never once remember me with a kind word? Nancy, Nancy, I called Herbert this morning while you were asleep. He'll come and you'll make up," in an icy voice and a mother. "And if you see me for just not wanting my daughter to become a fallen woman and go after men, that's your problem. You're the one who started dating Herbert before you were married. You gave him your honor and your heart. Now live with him, whatever he turns out to be a pure woman like your mother. All our women are honorable," shouted the mother with pathos. Nancy emphasized to herself the main point of her mother's monologue. Yes, that one was definitely not going to help. and she had already pawned it off on her aggressive husband. She was tired. She remembered an incident from her childhood, when her mother and father hated each other all her life and brought each other up. Dad got drunk to spite her and had mistresses all the time. And the mother, with the same icy face, proudly, as it seemed to her, carried through life worthy in quotes the role of a pure, decent woman and head of the family. Mother devoted herself to the great mission, to turn her father's monster into a prince by the power of her love. Only one trouble is that no one has ever managed to re-educate a grown man. But to toughen against himself, to make the whole family suffer and waste time. Oh yes, the mother got it right. As even the mother began to draw up documents for the right to inherit her share of jointly acquired property. It turned out that his share of Nancy's father, even in his lifetime, had rewritten to other people. They've been living with Mom ever since, from bread to water, and she's been working part-time since she was 12, when others are still playing with dolls. It's a good thing her father approved of her taking dance classes from an early age. After he passed away, Nancy started teaching dance to her school friends, and now works as a choreographer. How much humiliation and complaining from left-wing views did she have to endure back then? Well, look, requested. For a little money to walk the dog, to help with household chores, neighbors. And she teaches her school girlfriends how to move and dance beautifully. To tell the truth, she didn't have any girlfriends left after she had to work part-time on her own. The girls were divided into those who pitied her and took her, hence the dance lessons, and on those who were just happy to start moving more gracefully and being liked by the boys for a negligible amount of money. Because for all her poverty, Nancy always stood out, had a graceful gait, and a perfect gait. She held her head proudly and floated as if either breathless amidst the gossip, the constant guilt she felt toward her mother, and other difficulties of life. Right now, she wouldn't blame her mother. Already, if in childhood she was able to find a way out of the situation and bought her own textbooks and used clothes, and even looked fashionable in them. That is now because of fear and poverty will not allow herself to break. After all, it is not the mother's fault that the majority of the population rather survive than live. Hence all these dramatic decisions. Beats means she loves, be wise, and other justifications for the position of the patient, and battering girls. No, there was no way Nancy was going to say a word to her mother. The young woman sighed. There wasn't much money on the card. Just enough for 2 months. Mom, I'll stay with you for a little while, and then I'll leave the day after tomorrow. That's all Nancy said. She didn't really plan to wait for a few days, and was going to leave today, but she knew that her mother would start calling Herbert secretly. And if, so to speak, at least he wouldn't arrive too soon. That's what happened. The mother locked herself in the bathroom and said something in a furious whisper to her now ex, which was inaudible, but clearly convincing her to reconcile. Nancy sighed and connected to the cell phone internet. She found an ad for an inexpensive room for rent for a week and texted in her father that she wanted to rent it. She was asked to call back. She picked up the trash in a bag and yelled, "Mom, I'll take the trash out." She went outside and made sure the room was rented by someone other than the agency owner. It was a good thing for her. No need to travel several times, looking at rooms without being sure that the landlord would like you and not be suspicious. She's too young, though, and it might have seemed suspicious that she was only moving in with a computer. Agencies not located. For long chats. And even though they took the commission, you could move in after 2 p.m. There were only 2 hours left. Nancy decided not to risk going home, in case drunk Herbert sobered up and went looking for her. That's not really like him. Usually he thinks of himself that he's a valuable prize, and if you leave him, you'll regret it. And it's the fool's fault. Well, there's bad luck for old women too. If his mother's been calling him since morning, maybe he'll go for it. "Mom, I've arranged to stay with a friend of mine. Have you been in the bathroom? I didn't want to bother you. I thought it'd be a while. I'll think about it all and call you in a couple days." That's all Nancy said on the phone. Why would you do that? Wait till he gets here. You'll see things will work out. I talked to him. He's so sorry, so sorry. The way she was telling Nancy to come back, she got a little scared. She thought maybe there was a secret conspiracy between some women to make each other miserable. The more women sacrifice to who knows who and why, the more medals they get. The young woman grinned bitterly at her thoughts and said aloud, "Mom, I'm sorry, but I didn't call Herbert. He's on his way to your place." She disconnected the call and put the phone on silent. She knew she was about to get a lot of calls from her mom, Herbert from her mom's friends, and who knows who else from the last time she tried to leave her husband. She'd given up and failed to act so decisively. But this time she was ready. Her biggest fear was not that Herbert might hurt her, but that she wouldn't be able to stop if she got on the warpath and end up going down for the murder of an abusive man, a kitchen boxer who dishonored the male species by belonging to it. Men can be forgiven a lot of things because they're ordinary people and subject to weaknesses. But if a man is capable of picking fights with a woman on a regular basis, there is nothing more to talk about no matter how or what he explains it. Nancy put a bold end to that relationship. At the same time, Adriana, word from Nancy recalled a long-ago conversation with her late hubby that ruined her life once and for all. "Adriana, are we all fighting with you? Since we can't have kids, let's have a little girl or a little boy. Alex is going to take care of the baby? You're all about drinking and women. Last week, I went to my mom's for 2 days. You think I didn't notice that my most expensive regional blouse and perfume were missing? What kind of sickness is waiting on the family bed again? What kids? Adriana, the truth is, she didn't marry Alex for love. She liked the very different Jack, and he seemed to accept her signs of attention and hinted that she was all right. But things didn't go any further than that. And then one day, when she decided to ask him directly if there was a future between them, he mumbled something like he was going to marry someone else. It was then that Adriana first awakened a wild hatred, and the first time it turned on her, she put on her skis and, out of breath, ran into the forest. She wanted to freeze there forever. She kept running and running. And it was very good that she wore only a sweater and a light jacket. The less tormented on the eyes appeared and froze tears. "Fool, fool, who needs you?" Imposed on him, and he mocked you. "Die." So she screamed to herself and ran until she was exhausted. Then she fainted. A bearded old man with kind eyes bent over her. "Did you have a fight with your fiancé?" However, here in his flask was almost undiluted alcohol, and the liquid burned and forcibly forced the blood to circulate. "Back to this life. We'll be there soon. You're not far away. But just in case I take you to the hospital, things will change. You're young and ruddy, and you'll be fine. You'll meet another good guy," said the forest ranger who saved her. At the hospital, they told her that nothing would ever change. Her baby was dead, and she would never be able to have any more children. The hatred for this Jack, her first love, had also transferred to Alex, who had long cared for her. She told him she was infertile, but he proposed to her anyway, and so wanted to get revenge and walk in those before the war. So they got married. She didn't know then that it was better not to marry for revenge, because whatever she did was revenge. The hatred grew and grew like a giant tumor. First, she wanted to end her own life, but she only ended up ruining her only firstborn son. Then she wanted revenge on Jack and only ended up getting involved with a womanizer and drinking high. And then he decided to take revenge on Alex's husband. After all, how dare he not love and worship her because she threw him her consent as a handout? What then would have to be bad for this girl they ended up adopting, since it happens to be so fiercely? Husband's 1 weak spot. 2 weeks had passed. Nancy was tired of the endless missed calls from Herbert, and was very happy when the message came that he was selling his apartment and would be leaving soon, where he would be going. It wasn't specified, but he was giving her a week to get her stuff. But no, I won't fall for that trick, Nancy thought. She bought all her things as the day went on, because her husband almost never gave her money for decent expenses. And for groceries was entitled to a maximum of $100 a month, of which he also brazenly took cash. Good, at least he did not take on alcohol, or the money would have run out in the first week. So there were no valuable things at home, and she just borrowed the old things of her school friend. She agreed to live with her for a few months on the condition that she would do household chores, and pay the utility bills for the whole apartment. Maria was more than satisfied. She had a sick father in her arms who could not be on the street without help. After all, someone had to load him into a wheelchair, call the elevator, walk with him in the fresh air, and come back. She herself worked as a nurse and was very tired, working several times a week until she was able to pick up more shifts at the dance school. Maria's father was quite an intelligent and even pleasant man. So this story ended up benefiting everyone. And Maria was so pleased that although at first she had only offered to live with them for 3 months, she now said that Nancy could live as long as she liked. Nancy, everything was more than satisfactory. She didn't have to endure her mother's daily entreaties to go back to her husband. The house had good security, and no outsiders were allowed in. So if the ex even tracked her movements, he couldn't do any harm. For the first time, Nancy habitually flinched when she put her fork into her plate too loudly or poured too much to the brim into her cup of tea. It seemed to her that now Herbert was going to come at her from around the corner, bailing out wild-eyed and looking for an excuse to beat her up. But nothing happened. Maria's father spent all day reading or listening to an old radio that had been inherited from his parents. Her friend would come home from work on weekends and go to bed almost immediately. And the next day, she would either spend the day with her father or go on a date with a handsome doctor who worked at the ER. It was hard for them to find time to see each other. Each worked a frenzied schedule, but all the more reason for them to appreciate each other, and something serious seemed to be looming. Nancy herself decided that she would make a long pause in the relationship, but still she couldn't help remembering the meeting that took place yesterday not far from the choreographic school. "Girl, is there a decent cafeteria nearby?" Nancy waved from the Mercedes, a well-dressed, handsome, and clean-cut brunette with a low forehead and brown eyes. "I don't know, sorry. I carry my lunches in a box." She pulled a clear, greenish, and plastic package out of her bag. Nancy really couldn't afford to stop by the cafe even occasionally. Her situation was too precarious. She needed to save up some money. She didn't want to pretend to be anyone. Although in the articles of fashion magazines and TV programs constantly said that it is necessary to portray that everything is given easily and to be a kind of airy muse. But Nancy didn't want to put up with anything fake anymore. And her relationship with Herbert was enough. First, she pretended it was okay that he used foul language. Then she tried to pretend she didn't notice that he often came in drunk. Then she patiently glossed over the fact that he gives too little money for food. And that's what it came down to in the end. She has allowed herself to be driven below the plinth. She won't let anyone else do that to her. Playing the wise woman, always feminine, understanding, and patient. She'd had enough. But the next day, a stranger guarded her already at the dance school and said, "Girl, I really like you. Let's just talk. After all, it does not oblige you to anything. By the way, my name is Kevin, and you? I'm Nancy, but we're not going to work out. I've decided to take a very, very long break, so it's not worth starting," Nancy replied. She liked his kind and sincere face, but didn't like his expensive suit and overly chic muffins. Nancy did not want to get into a Cinderella story. She was content with a modest life where, in case of emergency, she could foresee all the risks and solve problems, albeit with difficulty. Besides, men now seemed to her some splashy moulage boxes. If they gave even a ruble, they would demand back at least 1,000 R and would still think they had been given too little. And if she accepts a sweet bouquet of chocolate-covered strawberries from Kevin, which costs at least a few hundred, she will probably be obliged to live with him for a month, or even for the rest of her life, and still always be a terrific lover, a great hostess, and all that sort of thing. No way, she paid too much for living with Herbert and the $100 monthly food allowance. It's a good thing they didn't have kids yet. It would have been an even more violent movie. No, she would not contact any more bargains and pilots who wanted to exchange gold for cheap fakes and make herself look like a benefactor. She genuinely loved Herbert and thought he saw her as the one and only for life. But in the end, he turned out to be a cheap magician who sometimes threw her a little attention and affection as a handout. What did her mother tell her? If she beats him, she loves him. No, Nancy would not allow herself to be beaten mentally or physically again. Let this Kevin and his sweet bouquet roll a sausage down Meli Spaskaya. Nancy, you have such a face as if I were guilty of something, Kevin said. Apparently, the whole gamut of feelings was reflected on the young woman's face, but she didn't care. It's a good thing my face doesn't suit you, isn't it? Nancy replied. I'll be sorry to part with it. And your bouquet is too good for me. She wanted to say shovel and chocolate-covered berries in her Mercedes, but she decided that was a little class hatred and over the top. The guy's quite handsome. He's not guilty of anything, but she's not the one who's clinging to him. Let him just leave her alone and let her enjoy a quiet life, without the falsehoods and threats from the hypocritical wolf in sheep's clothing that was Herbert. By the way, that dumbass ex sent pictures of the stuff in the entryway and a picture of the dumpster. If the stuff doesn't show up, it goes in the dumpster. What kind of idiot is that? Does he think she's gonna run to make up with him for the stuff? After all, Nancy wanted to string angry messages back, but to teach a fool only tortures him. If a person writes such messages and behaves like that, words will not help. Herbert's at a different stage of evolution, when everything was solved with batons. But she won't turn into a primitive aunt for his sake. What do unhappy women who live too long with kitchen boxers like this often become? And trying to explain things to them. With these thoughts, Nancy waited for the streetcar and went home. It was a good day after all. Today, she had a student signed up for one-on-one regular lessons. Her mother has asked her to come to their house, which means that she will receive twice as much for each dance lesson as she would for a similar class with a group at the studio. Life is getting better, no matter how you look at it. Adriana, I can't go near your daughter. I've tried everything I can think of, and she reacts, and that's it. I'm just annoying her, Kevin justified to Nancy's mom. The nasty girl would be surprised to find out that she was the one she thought of as a mother, a little strange but still loving. She's the one who hired this one, Kevin. After all, if Nancy had finally given up on Herbert, there was no point in him renting an apartment on the edge of town anymore. Let him go back to his house. If the little girl who was about to find herself knew that her mommy wouldn't let her live a quiet life and would always be with her, yeah, how much money she wasted from the money that Daddy left people when he died so touchingly. What did he call her? You tell Tonetka. I know things haven't been great between us, but promise not to leave the glacier. She's so fragile at heart, and she loves you. Her husband, Alex, said to her, Well, of course, Alex. I'll spend everything on Nancy. You may rest assured, she said to the dying man. If this scoundrel had seen something further than his nose, he would have realized that you can't cheat and booze for years with a girl, humiliate her with contempt, and then ask her for alms. Yeah, she's certainly not going to leave Nancy. Adriana will be with her till her last breath. Let the hubby roll over in quotes and be happy. I mean, he's the one who's been shitting on her all her life. What did he hope she'd be kind? And the main thing is what a bastard gave her daughter the money. And I didn't give her a ruble, just the apartment. And he's not crazy, is he? Of course, if he'd left something to his wife, it wouldn't have saved the duck. But purely feminine, she would be pleased that this scum, her hubby, at least a little respect for her. All right, let this farmhand Herbert guess, you see, he didn't have the guts to finish off her daughter. She had explained everything to him in detail, which places to hit, so as not to finish him off at once. Nancy wouldn't have died immediately, but gradually and in agony. You don't even go to jail for that. Well, it happened. We fought. She taught you how to do it, didn't she? He would complain to the men on fishing trips that his wife was reading it too, and he'd put a couple of heads on himself. That's all there is to it. What's easier? So no, he didn't finish the job and didn't accomplish anything. Maybe this Kevin can do it. He was recommended by a good friend of mine as someone experienced in this kind of thing. Seems like a guy with a lot of experience. He's not afraid of anything. Kevin, I don't need to tell you. If she's annoyed by your point and expensive gifts, tell her you're just a driver, you just like her and stuff. You're embarrassed and you're sorry. Is it complicated or what? The short haircut and red-dyed hair made a belligerent impression with the powerful neck and tight athletic build. No, it's not complicated, of course, Adriana. But you don't forget the advance payment, or else for one gasoline, and a bouquet I've spent a lot, and showed the woman the receipts I will give only for expenses the rest. After the first result, when Nancy introduces you to Mommy, I mean me, and tell her that fate has favored her and a new prince has arrived. It's clear to you. Adriana asked sternly. I do. Adriana, you were recommended by a man for whom I would gladly do anything for free. But I'm not a rich man. It's expensive to live in the city. So I'll do what I can. Then do it. You can't get it from me for nothing. I'm not some stupid girl. Adriana said. I got it. Kevin mumbled, embarrassed. He thought no wonder Nancy was so sad. It's really unlucky to have a family. This one's unlucky. And why was this aunt so angry with her daughter? He thought to himself, but he's a professional. It's none of his business. Why does the client pay? On his account and provocation, cheating, and even petty theft. So if you think too much about justice, you can't get enough of it. You just have to do your job and get paid. Nancy, hi. It's Cindy. Don't you recognize me? Why do I ask? I haven't seen or heard from you in over 5 years. I haven't forgotten you, sister. And so began the next day for Nancy. Cindy, I'm sorry. It's just a lot has happened lately. I really didn't recognize you right away, but you're gonna be rich. Nancy knew she had an older sister and adopted much earlier than Nancy. But only one adoptive father, Alex, sometimes secretly helped people see her from her mother. She was adopted by good people who loved Ira like family. And though her father had offered to adopt her so the sisters could be together, her foster parents refused to give up Nancy. Alex himself did not want to. After all, he had grown very attached to his adopted daughter, and she was his only loss. Nancy, you come and visit me today, Cindy shouted into the receiver, like a joyous morning bird announcing to the whole forest that the sun was up again and everything was fine. Nancy wrote down the address. Okay, I'll be there tonight. I only have the subway and 2 shuttle buses to get there, so it won't be close. Good thing you called today. My friend's home tonight. I'm taking care of her dad when she's away. But I'll tell you all about it when I meet Cindy. I'm so glad you called, Nancy said. I also thought, oh, what a nasty person I've become. It took me a while to get excited about a sibling, the only person close to me by blood. I'll have to get something. Not a lot of money, but at least it's a good one. Waffles aren't cake, she'll do just fine. Nancy, there's a prince on the phone at the foundation who says he's cute. Maria laughed. Nancy's chest pounded. How did Herbert figure her out? There was no way she was letting him in. Nancy jogged over to watch the video image on the intercom. Luckily, it was only Kevin. Kevin, what do you want? I didn't give you my address. Nancy said sternly to the image of the young brunette. In a wet suit with a bouquet of tulips. I didn't give you my phone number either. Kevin grinned. I'll just drive you to work. You always leave on Wednesdays. Nancy, I'm not really a major. Just a simple driver just pretending to be rich to impress you. You'll forgive me. The man's look was so guilty that Nancy thought it would be all right if she listened to him. I'll be down in half an hour and we'll talk. Only not for long, Nancy warned. Maria stood nearby and shouted to her father in the kitchen. Dad, can you believe it? Nancy's already got her own driver, in a perfect tulip suit. Drove half an hour to take the young lady to work. Maria's arrowheads have a way of settling in. She actually knew the truth, and I'm sick of it. I'm leaving. But just thought I'd cheer everyone up in the morning. Daughter. Well, I don't want to embarrass my daughter. She can figure out her own personal life. I'm just trying to reason with her father. You better tell me before you get married, before grandchildren. I have at least a hypothetical chance to live, asked Maria's father, and smiled. He was happy to see his daughter in a good mood. He knew from experience that such a rise means only one thing with the fiancé: she is all right. I'm not embarrassed. I'm just jealous. Grooms in suits fall right at your feet. I could go to a wedding right now. Maria wouldn't stop. I'll come later tonight than usual. Embarrassed, Nancy said, and seeing the joyous, burned with curiosity. Maria's eyes and guess at the forthcoming date questions said, Sis of my own kind will announce Cindy, I told you. She was adopted before I was, and we rarely saw each other, Nancy said. Her father signaled, "You see, a man is going through a serious personal crisis, and you're here with your silly jokes." But Maria herself sensed that her friend was having a hard time, and became serious, of course. "You excuse my stupid jokes, just showed up. Did not merge as from the picture, could not resist. Just like you're from a soap opera. He's beautiful." Maria smiled a little. "We understand, Maria. I would have laughed myself. Nothing, he doesn't mean anything to me. He's just attached. I'll listen to him. And I'll explain again that there's no chance. He's still a human being." And he even apologized, Nancy said. Actually, she's a bit of a liar. The guy's managed to change his opinion of himself a little bit for the better, by persevering and admitting that he's actually a regular driver. It's not really his fault he met her at a bad time, is it? It's not like he'd done anything wrong. That's what Nancy was thinking when I went downstairs and got ready to talk to Kevin. It wasn't a short conversation. The guy was being polite and was displaced. This time he only had a nice, modest bouquet of 3 delicate red tulips. So Nancy allowed herself a ride to work and listened to the story of the driver who took the chief's car to impress her. "Kevin, you're very nice, you really are. But I really can't build a relationship after everything I've been through," Nancy said. "Okay, well, let's just be friends for now. And just so you don't break yourself and give me your phone, I'll call myself." The guy defiantly grabbed the seat of Nancy's phone and dialed his number. But he blushed so sweetly and apologized so much for his insistence that Nancy didn't get mad at him. After all, she had warned him. And then it was his own decision, and she had nothing to do with it. Nancy and Cindy had tea in the evening, where the sister lived. High ceilings, 3 meters high, spacious. You could ride a bicycle in the corridor. Yes, apparently Cindy lives well. Glad and sad at the same time. Nancy. On the one hand, it's great to see a family member living well. But on the other hand, it's a shame she's lived there all her life and never seen anything new. She and her father lived in a small room with a hunger pantry, and it was in the pantry that Nancy often did her homework, when her father and mother were once again yelling at each other. It seemed to her that somewhere there in the pantry lived fairy tale midgets, who one day would show her the magic passage to their country. It must be somewhere among her old toys, and she would go to a place where she would be loved. But the midgets never came. She grew up and stopped believing in them. But in an apartment like Cindy's, I guess only kind giants could live in an apartment like this. Portraits of her adoptive parents were in the library. They smiled from the photos. Kind, bright men, women, and everywhere were pictures of them with a small and always dressed up VIP. "You like the apartment?" Cindy noticed her sister looking around admiringly. "Well, of course, who could not like it here, spacious and bright, very cozy?" Nancy answered simply and truthfully. "Then you can live here," suddenly the sister said. Nancy did not understand. She thought she was just inviting her to stay here, and she began to assure her that it wasn't necessary at all. And she lived perfectly well, as long as she didn't want to live as a resident. After all, it wasn't Cindy's fault that she was loved more. And she lived in better conditions. Each person has their own destiny. "Nancy, you don't understand. Sit down on the sofa, because the news is rather surprising to me." Cindy began the conversation for which Nancy had invited her little sister. "You see, the father you thought was adopted, he's actually your own father and mine. But we have different mothers. My mother, his first wife, she was much older than him and left him with me in her arms when he was only 19 years old. She had cancer, but she still gave birth to me. Our father was young and participated in some pranks. In general, he and his friend wanted to take away their motorcycle from the majors who were bullying them and accidentally hit one of them with a car. That's how my dad ended up in jail. I don't know how he met your mom and where is she now. But you were born in prison, and my father put me in an orphanage before he got there. And I poured more tea for myself and my sister." "Is my mother alive?" Nancy asked. "What? I don't know. She hasn't heard from them. She went out and disappeared. But my father, when he got out, wanted to adopt me. But my current parents had already taken me in. I got used to them. I didn't want to leave them. He married your foster mom, Adriana, because she told him she couldn't have kids. So he figured a woman like that would be happy to take in other people's girls. I wanted to take you and me, but it was just you. As now you know, Cindy cut off a piece of cake, and Gustav stopped telling him for a while. Cindy, and these are the apartments of your foster parents? Nancy asked. No, these are the apartments our birth father left for me. You probably know the story. Your mother had a big tantrum about the fact that her husband had signed over the marital apartment to what she thought were total strangers before he died. But my father decided to leave the apartment to me and the money to you, and no one could stop him. He left us money in his own way. Nancy wondered. Well, yes, said Cindy. Didn't your mother give it to you? My father signed the apartment over to my parents, and they gave it to me, and he left you all his savings, so it's about even. Mom never gave me anything. How could she? I mean, we've always lived in poverty. Nancy looked at her sister questioningly. Father had written in his journals that Adriana might not give the money away. At least he won't take revenge on her. On account of our relationship not working out, Cindy said. Diaries. My father kept them. Will you let me read them? Nancy's eyes lit up at the news, and she immediately forgot about money and apartments. She loved her father very much, even though she knew he was a difficult man. Nancy, there's a lot about diaries that you're not ready for yet. Believe me, when the time comes, you'll know everything. In the meantime, I'm asking you to accept this apartment. I hate to say this, but my adoptive parents are not poor, and I already have other properties, Cindy said. She saw how poorly Nancy was dressed and felt guilty that she had all this time lived a well-fed and prosperous life where she was loved. That her sister had been deprived of everything and love and shelter and money, deprived even of security, Cindy thought, remembering her father's notes about Adriana. Nancy, be careful of your mother. There are direct indications in the diaries that she was very resentful of your father and was going to take her resentment out on you. Of course, your father could have been wrong, but he was afraid for you. At least promise not to tell your mother anything about the apartment or our conversation. And if you see anything suspicious in her behavior, contact me at once. I won't let you down, Cindy said firmly. But Nancy was coming down with too much. She needed to digest all this news. So she asked Cindy for permission to stay here overnight. Of course, it's your apartment now. All that's left is the formalities to formalize it. You've already filed for divorce, Cindy clarified, from which she didn't say a single important detail. Nancy nodded. But then the wait won't be long. As soon as you're divorced, you'll be eligible. Stay here, Nancy. Don't tell anyone your new address. What about Maria's father? I'll get him a nurse. Tell him you're coming on vacation with me for a month, like it's been a while or something. I'm pregnant and I need support. You know, whatever you can think of. Cindy hugged her by the shoulders and looked into her eyes affectionately, as when she was a child. Nancy was overwhelmed with so many feelings that she couldn't even respond. Only nodded again. Her eyes were sticking together. Still, she called her mom and informed her that she wouldn't be back until tomorrow. No problem. You know I'm free tomorrow. Plus, my fiancé is coming to meet my dad. I think I'm getting proposed to, so we won't be bored tomorrow. Although in general, of course, we love you very much and are waiting for you. Maria shouted joyfully into the phone. While she was talking, Cindy had already put her bedding in one of the rooms. Apparently, she saw that her sister's eyes were already slipping from fatigue. But still Nancy crawled to the shower. It was as if her thoughts had stopped in her head. She didn't understand what was happening anymore. Why? And where would it lead? Only one thing was obvious tonight. It was time to go to bed. A few more weeks passed. Nancy went to the movies and the amusement park with Kevin. It didn't involve anything. The young man didn't even try to kiss her. He was a strange mixture, macho and boyish. Some moments he was bragging that he was the great and powerful one who could roll mountains. And other times he just joked like a schoolboy and smiled embarrassedly. He was easy to be with. Mom, look what I brought you, just like you dreamed. She handed her mom a sporty and dressy at the same time. Adriana had been looking for something like this for a long time. On the one hand, it's comfortable, it doesn't rub anything anywhere, And on the other hand, it looks quite romantic, which every woman will like. Thank you, I did. You're looking a little cheerful. Nancy, you're seeing that driver again? Adriana asked, pretending to be a concerned mother. Yeah, Mom, I don't know if and when it'll work out. But he makes me feel good, and that's a small part of it. Because after I broke up with Herbert, I saw every man as the aggressor. Gullible Nancy thought so. Of course, she remembered Cindy's warning, but her mother couldn't have disliked her. She's at least attached to her anyway. And the fact that she didn't give the money her father had given Nancy could be explained in any number of ways. Maybe he's holding it back for a particularly difficult time for his daughter. Well, I'll make sure you come and meet him. Daughter, I'll introduce him to you. At least just as a friend. A mother's heart can sense who's right for my daughter. Adriana, almost like a normal mother, hugged Nancy and took her to the kitchen to feed her dinner. Just the other day, Adriana had an unpleasant conversation with Kevin. Adriana, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to hurt her. She's not like my other clients. Nancy is simple, kind, and domestic. She's a real firefly. How could I hurt her? I've just cheated on serious ladies who've gone on without me before. But here, no, I'm refusing the assignment. With all due respect, what do you mean, you're turning it down? Do you know what happens to people who turn me down? Adriana asked, or rather whispered. You know I do, because the bunny who asked you for help was in jail with her own ice mom. Well, whom you framed then, or rather, she voluntarily agreed to take on your crime as well. I mean, she's going away for life anyway. I've heard a lot about your orders, Adriana, so I'm gonna anticipate your next remark and ask you to part amicably. Because when I get upset, I get very chatty. I can't help it. I've been known to do that, Kevin replied in her tone. Yeah, the guy's tough. We'll have to work around that. Adriana thought, but she said out loud, All right, Kevin, let's not fight. Come visit me with my daughter and ask her to introduce me to her new friend. Don't get upset at once, and you will return the deposit when you can. It's just a matter of time. That's not a good test. Adriana, I'm not going to break up with Nancy. Adriana, I'm going to protect her from you. And if I do, I'm gonna marry her and live with her for the rest of my life. So don't mess with me. I'm a guy too, and I know my way around and out, Kevin said unexpectedly. Adriana straightened up with anger. She couldn't even say anything in response. She just choked with anger and with the words, well, we'll see about that. She disconnected from the conversation. So the fake fiancé of the stupid duck is falling more and more in love with my favorite, in quotes, daughter. Well, that's too bad for him. I mean, he hasn't gotten much of anything yet. So let him eat his love. The woman decided for herself, and this thought calmed her down a little. After a little thinking, she dialed Herbert, ex-husband, who was not capable of anything and did not bring the matter to an end. Maybe come to his senses in his province. Probably didn't much like living paycheck to paycheck and working after the cushy life she'd sponsored for him. Herbert. Well, it's kind of chilled out in the gold. She wanted to be cooler, but she was pissed off by her conversation with Kevin. How dare that brat talk to her like that? And Adriana started to lose it. She couldn't hide her true colors anymore. I got that in a rehab for alcoholism. And I'll tell you what, I will never be a bastard. I'd rather die homeless on the street. The boy only sighed. After all, he knew how complicated and moreover dangerous the mother of the young woman he had fallen in love with really was. So Kevin only nodded and promised to follow exactly all the instructions. Oh, Kevin, you are such a handsome young man. Where do you work? Adriana asked, in a tone as if she had never seen him in her life and hired him to ruin her daughter's life. I used to work for bastards like you and help them ruin the lives of their loved ones, Kevin thought. But that's not what he said out loud. I work as a driver, Adriana, replied the young man. Do you get paid well? Continued the game cunning woman on the cake. I see enough for flowers bouquet, though poor. Well, you can see our good taste. Adriana knew Nancy bought the cake and the flowers. She just wanted to remind Kevin once again that he would be without income for a long time and would sit on bread and water. But why are you doing this to Kevin? Isn't it better to earn your own money? Honestly, and live in peace. Not everyone has to be a businessman with a dying tone, said Nancy. Oh, come now, Nancy, of course, not everybody. I didn't mean anything bad by it. I just wanted to compliment you on your attention. Forgive me if I got anything wrong. I'm not young anymore. Adriana donated the longest voice. That's how the whole acquaintance went. I was still glad that my mother, although I was sarcastic, but clearly revived, and she felt better. Since that day, the mother every day began to talk about Kevin. Then, accidentally working in the police, a neighbor noticed him and reported that he moonlighted in the detective agency. Then suddenly, the neighbor clarified the information about the guy and learned that he checked the fidelity of other people's wives and girlfriends. That is, he was both an Alfonso snitch and an uncle on call in one person. In general, Adriana was counting on the fact that this news had stunned Nancy and knocked her off her feet. Let's see how the bird sings now. I thought she was a wicked stepmother. Don't tell him anything, my daughter. He's a dangerous, unscrupulous type. Uncle Borgia, our district officer and neighbor, said so about him. Be very careful with this guy. There's no place to brand him. But to her surprise, the adopted daughter reacted to the message as if amused and almost indifferent. Maybe she was just in a stupor. Adriana hoped, but that wasn't the case. After the meeting with her mother, Kevin had told her all about his past. Nancy didn't hide the fact that her mother had hired him. Ava listened to some of their conversations that wouldn't hurt the young woman much, but might have confirmed the truth of his words. Nancy, I would never tell you this. Well, long story short, I put your mom's phone under surveillance, even though it's illegal, and found out she was going to hire an even more dangerous person. Kevin looked her straight in the eye and was ready for any reaction. Seeing her looking at him expectantly, he continued, By the way, your ex isn't such a cum man. Adriana offered him to fight for you again and threatened him that he would rot in his province. But he still wouldn't take her money. Kevin, I don't know what to say. I'm having a hard time processing all this. I'll take a break, Nancy said firmly. Okay, but knowing that I'm going to keep an eye on you and not let anyone hurt you, I was starting to fall in love with you. About starting to fall in love. That was Kevin's only lie. In fact, he was already in love, and everything else was the truth. There are fatal and temporary women, and there are turning points. Nancy was his turning point. She burst into his life like a conscience and gave him a choice. And he accepted this challenge of life, realized that there would probably be no other chance to change. What kind of a man am I if I can beat up a woman? If it had gone on like this, I would have probably started beating and eliminating old people's children for money too. No, God has saved me. And I won't serve you anymore. You and I have different masters now, and yours is somewhere in hell. So please don't call me and know that I'll soon get up the nerve to tell you all about you. Do you ever do a little better? Come to your senses. It's not too late for you to be a normal aunt, not a visible one. Ah, that's what you'll tell the ducks. You step 1 foot in our capital, and you'll be killed instantly. And in the phone to you, my daughter, my dear, already blocked everywhere and in social networks too. And she doesn't pick up phones from unknown numbers. So think very carefully, my love. Think very carefully. Otherwise, you might not be able to think very soon. Adriana almost choked with rage. It's all against her. But she would not give up. In the evening, she sat in front of the portrait of her husband, Alex, from another world through a black frame. On her looked so loved and hated at the same time face, and the face of the man who brought meaning to life, and at the same time filled this life with pain. It's your fault, Alex, that your people have not long left to smoke, as Kevin said. So let it shine on this sinful earth. I'll spend it all on your daughter like you asked. Honey, I won't forget my promise. You and Nancy will meet soon, buddy. Adriana drained a glass of vodka and picked up on a fork small pickles, but my favorite for your money, which will help to change the fate of your daughter for the better, for the better. For me, of course. The woman laughed her minced laughter. Mom, what's wrong? Are you sick? Nancy opened the door with her key and found a strange scene. Her mother, shaggy-haired, no hair, staring hatefully at her late father's portrait and laughing. And even when Nancy called out to her, Tanya heard, only kept repeating, I promise, my love, I promise. A real hysteria happened to her. Adriana did not notice anyone or anything around her. Nancy looked sadly at the cut glass and the almost empty bottle. Quietly, she put the portrait away and put her to bed, thinking of nothing. "Adriana, it's all right, it's all right. Everything will get better," said the kind young woman, and stroked the evil stepmother on her gray head. While her father had been alive, her mother had dyed her hair regularly, done her makeup and hair, but now she had turned into a wreck, even though she wasn't old yet. Nancy did not know that Adriana was overcome not so much by longing for her departed husband as by her own anger and hatred. These destructive feelings took complete possession of the woman and, like a hurricane, inflicted destruction incompatible with the life of the human soul. And so it came to pass. The stepmother's body lived on and on. He invented insidious schemes, and in the soul barely flowed that divine spark, which to the last hopes to ignite even in the most egregious. Bastards. We should invite Kevin over tomorrow. Let her mother be happy that things are getting better and stop worrying about her. My mother must feel guilty about not letting me live with her, Nancy thought. If only she knew how far her opinion was from the truth. Of course, Adriana didn't think to worry about her. If she was worried, it was only because she still hadn't managed to live with Nancy's Sveta. The next day, Nancy did come to visit with Kevin. "You're dressed up. Here are some flowers and a cake. I bought them for my mom. You give it to her. My mom's a difficult person, but she raised me. I'm very grateful to her. I'm not even her own. She kept giving me instructions with Nancy's instructions." And that's what she was all about, caring. Plain and simple. It's not often that you get a chance to try to live like a decent person again. And every such chance should be grabbed like a bluebird. Kevin, though he was an abandoned and cynical young man, intuitively sensed something very high and formidable. One last waggle of his finger, jabbing a finger pointing straight into the very rottenness of his soul. If he pretended now that he hadn't noticed anything, the soul would never be sick again. The soul would simply die. Because Kevin was ready for anything and would accept any fate that would follow forgiveness, which could be granted even to the most confused and confused person. If he, like a baby, at least a few steps crawled on all fours towards the Creator, trustingly and without a shadow of doubt. Where did he get all these thoughts? Kevin was kind of embarrassed to realize that he was beginning to change drastically. Maybe it helped that he had called his grandmother, who lived in a remote village, and raised him there. "Kevin, I pray to Vladika Nikolai for you. You're Nicholas by your father's side. And you too, at least pray and go to the temple. It's not prejudice. How many centuries have our ancestors lived like this?" Suddenly my grandmother's voice warmed up. She added, "Kevin, I'll tell you what. Let's all take a risk. Oh, Grandma feels that she'll wait for her granddaughter." "Well, Grandma, what granddaughters?" "You're Nancy. She doesn't even see me as a boyfriend yet. Not like a husband against your will." The young man's face began to blush, as if suddenly there was a steaming heat. "Well, Grandma's in no hurry. Grandma will wait for her granddaughter. The main thing is to keep going. You know how those teeth of yours came out? You only turned off the path. He was stabbed to death on the first theft, and his mother didn't last long after that. Kevin, you can't cheat in front of God. He sees everything. I'll pray for you. Do what you gotta do. And be a man. Thank you, Grandma. I love you, sweetheart. I'm sorry I don't visit much. I'll be sure to get to you. It's a good thing you didn't throw away the cell phone I gave you and are coming by." "I thought I'd have to go to your place in the middle of nowhere," Kevin joked. Because he knew his grandmother was a techie. She knows how to use a computer too. And the fact that you are always up to date on all the news shows with the neighbor shows on the laptop. She even knows how to distribute cell phone Wi-Fi. His grandmother's a world beater, to tell you the truth. If it wasn't for her, Kevin would be dead and drunk like a lot of country men. "Do what you have to do and be a man," Kevin repeated with a childish smile. Elderhood is his, who's a master at coming up with mottos. What about it? After all, worked as a teacher of literature and Russian language. And she kept the vegetable garden in order. "Nancy, what can I tell you?" "Of the two, it's Kevin who tells you the truth," Cindy said, when her sister told her of her difficult situation, and added, "I suppose it's time to show you your father's diary." Cindy left the room and brought out some simple 96-sheet notebooks in a plain blue cover and hand-stitched. Cindy opened her diary to the correct pages that contained the answers to her questions and left her alone with the candid entries. Nancy recognized her father's handwriting immediately. "I found out too late. It seems Temechka gave me too many heart pills, and before that she gave me regular sleeping pills. I'm sorry I made such a monster of my wife. Girls, I hope you will be okay. I haven't been a good father and I've been a bad husband. But it's too late to change now. How does my heart ache?" That's where the diary stops. Cindy explained that she took the diary and the library after her father died. She had not taken it, but had bought it back for quite a lot of money. Adriana gladly agreed to get rid of the junk. "It's a good thing your mother didn't find the diaries. They were tucked away in the back of a large plywood box that held our father's childhood photos," Cindy explained. Nancy read her father's diary all night, and she thought she was going to lose her mind and that the world had turned upside down. She didn't think it could be so painful to find out that someone close to you didn't want you. What's more, her mother hates her. I'll stay close. Because if I try to leave, she'll destroy either me, Nancy, or both of us. That's what she told me. I can't let that happen. I've offered to get Tony treatment, but she's afraid I'll lock her up in a madhouse. That's as far as I've gotten. Nancy, when it was already morning. She hadn't read the whole diary, but she'd already gotten the answer to the biggest question of all, who to believe, Kevin or her mother. They drank their morning coffee with Cindy in almost complete silence. The older sister understood without words the stress her sister was going through right now. "Nancy, there's nothing you can do about it. Some people are obsessive and not their own masters. You have to accept that. Don't hate Adriana. It can destroy you. Hate the darkness that eats away at her like rust. And also accept that you can't change her," the sister said. Cindy worked as a therapist, but she didn't want to get her sister and burden her with complicated terminology. She found simple and important words for her, filled with love. "Thank you. I will try to look at Mom as a sick person, a person who allowed her soul to be destroyed," Nancy replied. "And be very careful, very careful. If anything, call me at once," said Cindy, and added, "If your sister is very frightened, she can live here and not go out at all. Cindy will buy groceries and arrange at work that she can't go out for a while. No. I promised the men I'd help her with her dad for another month. There's no way she can do it without me. A paid caregiver isn't gonna help. Maria's dad's just starting to get out of his wheelchair once in a while." "I can't leave him," Nancy said. Or was she just sighing? Another would have crawled under the bed and trembled with fear. "But my sister walks around the city unafraid." Cindy trusted Kevin, though. He was a professional and promised to look after her. Cindy offered him money for the favor, but he refused. He must really be in love with Nancy, Cindy thought. Dependable, brave, in love in this situation. Just right. And you teach men to dance. There was a very strange customer at the dance school today. A man in his 40s with a hunchbacked nose and hair and scars in several places. He reminded her of someone, but Nancy couldn't remember who. "Well, I don't teach exactly, but there is a class for men at our school," Nancy replied and called out to her colleague James. "Come here." A man came to learn to dance. The man tried for a while to insist on learning from her, but then he agreed to go to dance with James. He helped mature men to become more risky and mobile, and looking at any condition of their joints and backs, the guy picked up concise, impressive dances especially for macho men of age, who still wanted to impress girls and ladies at discos and cafes. "Nancy, why didn't you take him? The guy's weird, but he pays well. He's made 2 trips. I owe him in advance. You know, like interest." James handed her one red piece of paper. "Well, that's a lot. I mean, we're only 10%, and that's only from the first class." Nancy honestly thought he had $90 in change. But the clients are too fat to pay 2.5 times that, and in advance. Sounds like he's got a crush on you. Asked me what schedule you work on and his in the hallway. James winked, and not very persistently tried again to get the $90 back, and was very pleased when Nancy once again refused to take more than the allotted amount. Meanwhile, Nancy was frantically flipping through her correspondence with Kevin. There was a picture somewhere that looked like today's strange visitor. And here are some pictures of people Kevin thought her stepmother might hire. Among them was this one with the hunched nose, scarred on the back of his neck for baldness. Only he was much younger in the photo. But it was definitely him. We should check on Mom again, pretend to like the new student, and ask her opinion. Nancy thought suddenly. She knew James had taken his picture for the questionnaire. He always did that when he took money in advance. Asked her mother to forward the originals to us. Look what a great guy started courting me. Tried to sign me up for a dance class. I refused him, but he still signed up in Seregi with money. Such a message, sent Nancy mother, and literally 5 minutes later received a reply. You can tell he's reliable. Lots of smiley faces, plus hearts and flowers. Well, can't you trust your mother? Nancy thought, though it made sense, previously from Kevin's conversation with her sister and her father's journals. But somehow that was the only thing unusual. Warm, heartfelt messages. Put some kind of fat point on trusting her stepmother. Nancy began to pack for home. Before leaving, she looked at herself in the mirror. She looked younger and slimmer. And the mirror looked back at her almost girlish with a beautiful, Pavel face, a luxurious mane of hair by a high ponytail. A tall with long legs confident person. Studied her and the mirror with gorgeous, clear, gray-blue eyes. Is it really Nancy, I thought. After all, a month ago she was tired with a face of gray color bags under her eyes and looked at the world without the vital look of a woman who seems to be still young on the outside, but in the soul has already retired. Well, Frank, you're a different story. Right off the bat. My mom already sent me your picture, Adriana, Frank said. That's great. Dear Adriana, who would doubt it? All the girls are hitting on me. So I take her out to a restaurant. On the way back, I tell her I'm drunk and ask her to drive. And then she gives me a ride, and I ask her to park the car in front of her house. I live in a bad neighborhood. In the meantime, we warmly say goodbye with a long kiss. My little man is working on the brakes. She doesn't drink and drive. Frank checked again. She doesn't drink. She's had enough of her daddy. Doesn't take a drop in her mouth. She drives. She got her license a few years ago. Sometimes let her drive his cars. Actually, it was mine, but it doesn't matter. Adriana made a wish. With Frank, it was possible not to pretend to be a good girl and be herself. He'd run any errand. It was always a question of price. And you're paying for the machine, Adriana. I mean, it'll be unusable. You can't even sell it for parts. In a businesslike manner, Frank clarified. As if it were a household errand. You have to pay for pleasure. I will. Don't worry. What are you, small advances or what? Did you get it? Adriana summed it up. It's not a big deal. Everything's spotless on my end. The car's not registered to me, and then I'll just lay low for a while. Of course, after you've paid me in full, Frank emphasized the word full. Okay, call me tomorrow night. How will it be done? I've already bought the groceries for the banquet. I'll make the feast, merrily rebutted stepmother Nancy. Don't doubt, my little man will film everything. See the daughter in a black bag with Columbus movie and state himself. I'm very pleased. What a talented man can compose poetry if the pay is good. I have high hopes for you, sweet man, said Adriana. From the anticipation of the realization of a long-standing revenge, she even got hungry. The champagne will be opened after everything is done. But the sandwich with red caviar could be eaten beforehand. Adriana generously spread a slice of bread, butter, and put an even thicker layer of caviar on top. It looked appetizing. The woman gritted her teeth into the food that epitomized her impending victory and ran to inform her husband in the black-framed photo that he would soon see Nancy, but the portrait was not there. The cage had discarded it surreptitiously so the mother wouldn't freak out. The woman figured it out next. That's all right, I'll order it. The new ones will celebrate tomorrow night with Alex. After all, one way or another, I've devoted my entire life to my husband, even after he was gone. And who'll call me a bad wife after that? The woman laughed darkly and still could not stop the hysterics. Even a glass of vodka didn't help. I had to take a shower and lie down on the sofa. After all, tomorrow was a holiday, and she had to be in good shape. Adriana slammed down another glass and passed out, managing to put her phone on vibrate. Nothing important was going to happen today. Everything is tomorrow. Tomorrow is a happy day, and today you can relax and rest. Adriana fell asleep and did not see the messages on the phone, and there were quite a lot of them. In one of them, Frank informed that there was a small problem. Nancy refused to go to the restaurant. She's on her way to your place, so I'll work on the brakes on your car. And you just ask her to get home in your car, and it's a done deal. It'll all work out today. The second message was from Nancy. She informed her mother that she was coming tonight and would take her sister with her. The girls wanted to talk frankly with Adriana, and you will ask her about Nancy's mother and persuade her to get treatment from a psychiatrist. Threaten jail if necessary. But Adriana didn't see either message. She was dead asleep. What kind of sleep? Only infant laborers. People with a clear conscience and people with no conscience at all. Adriana woke up when it was already dark and took out a portrait of some woman from the shelf. But there was still some vodka, and saw with satisfaction that there was still half a sandwich with a little 500 caviar on the plate. Julie is your daughter. She'll die tomorrow. Yeah, Frank's tuned up, so the brakes won't work. Remember when I told you Jack died by accident? I mean, you saw the whole thing and you could have ratted me out. But that thing didn't die by accident. He had to pay for not marrying me for my unborn firstborn. The man was not all loud and threw Adriana. Even though you're gone and you don't toast the dead. Or when they drink to the dead nothing, repent. What's the difference? So you took my crime because you thought you'd get life for stabbing your stepfather to death. I mean, it was so plausible. Everyone knew he beat you and your mother. Well, Julia, you didn't kill that filthy bastard. It was me who finished him off. Remember, I offered you a drink for courage. And then I made sure I followed through. You crossed me anyway. Jack liked you at first. Even though you didn't want him, you didn't need him. Adriana's echoes are back. Does that make it better? No, it's worse. And then it turns out you had Alex's baby. I hadn't even met Alex yet. But still, when I found out, I had to take some of your savings and spend it so you wouldn't have to serve a life sentence. I sent you to better places, didn't I? How do you like it there? It will only be 24 hours before you meet your daughter. The woman said Nancy's name in a raspy voice as if she was infinitely tired of saying it and hoped to forget forever about the child that had once been forced upon her. A friend blocked Adriana's phone, grabbed it. It was a movie. Adriana, we all heard, it's the end of the game. Cindy said quietly, looking into her eyes. And Nancy couldn't find the strength to look at her stepmother. All she saw was a sick and hunted animal mangled predator that was killing everyone it could get its hands on. So you ratted me out. Frank's rich parents, or did your bastard parents buy you out? I don't know why it didn't come out of the blue. She took the end game phrase as a celebration. I mean, everyone judges people by themselves. Adriana didn't recognize that phrase as just a suggestion to throw up the white flag. Adriana, wait, don't be so hot. You just don't drive anywhere. Tried to tell her Frank, who didn't understand anything, but tried to warn her that Adriana's car brakes were already ruined, as not to get in the car. Yeah, I know where to find you if you're not there. Goodbye to life. Bastards. Adriana burst out and threw the phone against the wall. So it shattered. She pushed the girls away and raced to her gray Chevy. What was she going to get that Frank from under the ground? She can't be treated like this. He would pay. Adriana was still very drunk and not thinking straight. Where and why she was going so urgently. She just wanted to act, to attack, to lash out right now at someone. I've been shooting the exits. She got on the highway, and she realized she was going too fast. She was trying to slow down a little bit to fit into the corner and realized that a gray Chevy was lapping the guardrail. So that's what Frank was trying to warn me about. Oh, I'm an idiot. All I should have done was listen and not celebrated my victory early. Well, at least it'll all be over. And yet how foolishly Adriana sang, I thought, before I fell into darkness. But nothing was over. Life had always been cruel to her, and now it didn't even give her an easy death. That was what Adriana thought. She was true to herself, and though she was now paralyzed for life, she continued to blame everyone and everything but herself. Cindy insisted that she be placed in a mental institution. Of course, she realized that only a miracle could change the brains and heart of such a hardened and stubborn malcontent. But she did it for Nancy. The hospital was well equipped, and Adriana had only one roommate who was also paralyzed. Cindy. Okay, so my mom wasn't a criminal. Did you hear that too? Did Nancy ask her sister? No, she just had bad luck with her friend. By the way, my dad's fourth notebook talks about it too. I wanted to burn it so I wouldn't hurt you. But now that you know everything, yeah, your mom's lucky to have a daughter. And me and my sister got Cindy. And did you get to talk to your stepmom yourself? Nancy wanted to say mom, but she couldn't. After all, she now had a picture of her own mom, who, as it turned out, she looked a lot like. Talk about what? Cindy wondered. Why was she committing all these crimes? Wasn't it easier to just leave her father and take his money? Nancy muttered embarrassedly. Cindy smiled. Her patients were always looking every last excuse for their loved ones, even when they had all the evidence at their fingertips that they weren't wanted or even hated. It was always like that. After all, every person remains a child at heart and wants to believe that at least a little bit of love, Cindy, Alex, or me, that's asking a lot. As a client recently told her, she didn't know what to say back then and just blamed the clientele. She didn't. Cindy. And what's a sister to say? Because her mother is a complete psychopath. There's no point in looking for noble motives where none exist. Nancy, why don't we go to the country for a week? Since your sister says you need to get away, Kevin said. About a week later, going into the ward, where Nancy once again visited my grandmother's mother, and I promised her your mother. After all, if she recovers, she'll probably go to jail anyway. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Well, I mean, the doctor said she won't recover, so it'll be okay. But in short, I'm confused. But honestly, she has a lot to think about since she still has time. I hate those sweet faces and Cindy years. Kevin fool. Wasn't it more honest to leave her to die? Like compassion. Screw compassion. Why did I get drunk early? Why didn't I listen to Frank? I'd have my daughter lying in a black bag right now, and found her a future. It turns out he's all glowing and disgusting. That's what Adriana was thinking angrily at the time. Kevin at that time went out with a man under the pretext that he had to put the car in the parking lot. And why did he say such a bad thing about Nancy's mother? Even though she's a witch, she's rarely attached to her. He should have thought. The boy was tapping his knuckles on his forehead, and an impressive red spot had already formed on his forehead. Nancy, well, really go with Kevin, you'll be back. Take over our dad's apartment. I mean, there's a reason he took out insurance. Not only did he leave your stepmother's money for you, but he left the apartment in safer hands. Adriana's eyes twitched in mine at the same time. Her face contorted with wild, uncontrollable anger. My husband still outplayed me. Even after the Kurd died, that's what Adriana was thinking as her heart counted its last beats, and she had seconds left to speak with her lips. I'm sorry, but her last word was creatures. She said that single word absolutely clearly and fell silent. Nothing could be done. Must have gotten overexcited from some of his own thoughts, or from what one of the visitors said today, sighed the doctor of the mental hospital. But it would be more accurate to say that Adriana didn't, because she had finally lost in her presentation. Kevin's grandmother had indeed waited for her grandchild. After all, just a year after Adriana was gone, Nancy saw 2 stripes on the test. Men jumped at this happiness. You can adopt the child, but I won't marry you. You take that to heart, Nancy told him. What do you say? The main thing is let's live together and raise the baby. Grandma said to call him Nick, and my father's name was conciliatory, Kevin said. He realized it would take time for Nancy to get over her first marriage. Well, he'd do everything he could to make that happen, wouldn't he? Kevin, what if we have a girl? What would we name it then? Nancy laughed. Grandmother, there's no mistaking it. You've met her, Kevin smiled. And Grandma really wasn't wrong. Nick was born and weighed almost 5 pounds. But the labor went surprisingly smoothly. And to their surprise, when Nancy arrived home from the maternity hospital as an infant, The whole family was waiting for her. In full, Cindy came with foster parents and a lot of clothes for the baby for 5 years ahead. Came with a friend and numerous juices, and sausage and lard homemade. Her ex-husband was eager to come too, but Kevin arranged it with him. He apologized to Nancy. Once on the phone and never appear in her life again. Otherwise, he would have to ride in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. That's what Herbert decided to do. Truth be told, he wanted to tell his ex-wife earlier that her mother was dangerous, but he was afraid of her threats. And when he finally did, Adriana was already dead. Still, he had to put a stop to it. Although in truth, he'd hoped to get Nancy back. But when he talked to Kevin and found out about the baby's appearance, his hopes evaporated at once, and Herbert limited himself to a very brief apology. He was a coward by nature, and if his addiction to alcohol had been cured, his cowardice had not. From her father's diary, Nancy learned another very important piece of news. Turns out he only really loved Nancy's own mother. That's what she remembers most. Adriana looks at me again, hopeful and reproachful. What can I offer her? After all, I don't love her at all, and I can never love her. Only Cindy and Nancy, my girls, the meaning of my life. I live and work for them, so I can leave them something behind. I live with this horrible woman and protect my daughters from her. That's the way it's gonna be. After all, and I am guilty of the fact that I tied my life with a woman who only tolerate, and which is squeamish even alcohol casual mistresses, cannot drown out the longing for Yulia. But now nothing can be done. Can the indifference of a beloved man turn a woman into a monster? Or has this monster already been slumbering, and only awakened from this indifference? And was it love on Adriana's part, or just a painful addiction? These were the questions Nancy often asked herself, but she realized that it was impossible to find an answer to them. Cindy thought that her sister was just looking for a loophole to find an excuse for her stepmother, who had brought her up and to whom Nancy was attached, but she never told her little sister about it. After all, everyone has to believe in something naive and bright. Otherwise, how to live?